Join us as we head south in search of adventure. This time we're heading to Botswana. But first we need to make the long journey via Scotland for our flight to Johannesburg. From Johannesburg we make the familiar 5-hour drive to Hoedspruit. Over these 5 hours we explore why we love overlanding and why we love overlanding in Africa. It's a well-travelled route for us, having lived in Hoedspruit for 3.5 years. Once in Hoedspruit we collect Nala, our 1996 300 TDI Land Rover Defender. She will be our home for the next 3 weeks. We'll leave an unusually cloudy Hoedspruit and make our way towards the border. This will be our first big Botswana trip as a family, and excitement levels are high. Our plan for the next 3 weeks is to explore 3 key areas of Botswana. First, we're camping for 6 nights in Khwai Magotho, which is basic camping at its best. This area is rich in wildlife, and we have a real possibility of finding elephant, hippo, lions, leopards, and even wild dogs. The border is about a 4-hour drive from Hoedspruit, so by lunchtime we're crossing the Limpopo River and we enter into Botswana at Martin's Drift. Relieved to have crossed safely, we take our time to stop for a bit of lunch at the side of the road. Our plan is for a quick overnight at Palapai before pressing on to the town of Maun, known as the gateway to the Okavango Delta, for supplies and a bit of R&R before we return to Khwai. With final preparations made, we leave Maun on the Chobe Road and head northeast towards Khwai. This road is a typical African bush road, and in August 2025 it isn't in great condition, so we air down our tyres, and although there is a lot of eagerness to get the journey done, we take it easy. It is dusty, in places corrugated, whilst in other places there's deep sand, but you know the 4 hours on here will be absolutely worth it. Of course, it's not without incident. We are heavily loaded, needing to be self-sufficient for the next 6 nights. Unfortunately, a broken shock absorber bracket only causes us a short delay. We are welcomed to Khwai Magotho by a spread-out tower of giraffe. We slowly pass the dead tree forest and find our campsite by the river. This is wild camping in one of the wildest areas of Africa. There are no fences, so we check our surroundings and begin to set up camp. We take extra care as a photographic guide working in the area stops by to inform us that a female leopard with a cub has been regularly spotted in the thicket next to our camp. We make sure we get an early night, and it is absolutely magic to fall asleep to the sounds of the African bush again. All night we hear hyena and jackal, but the loudest and closest calls of all were from the lion. We wake up early and ready to witness the sunrise and to track the lion who had been calling so close to our camp all night. He was out scent marking, and we spent a wonderful 30 minutes with him on his morning rounds before he disappeared into the Mopani forest, and we stopped for coffee and breakfast. With coffee and breakfast done, we head to the river roads, which at times introduce some challenging driving, and we find the area absolutely full of elephant. This is all on our first day in Khwai and absolutely set the tone for the next 6 days. By now we were already adjusting to the times and routines of Africa, and after our full days of game viewing we would return to camp to make fire, braai and sleep under the million-star skies, before heading out again at sunrise on game drives that were surpassing our expectations. There was a resident lion pride on our side of the river, and we were able to find them each day, but they were highly mobile and there was clearly trouble brewing with the larger pride north of the river. In the middle of the day we would take a break from our game viewing for lunch back at our camp. But here in Khwai, the game viewing never stops. Being next to the river, we would often have elephant crossing the river and head right towards us. It is amazing to be able to share this space with nature and is a real highlight of our time in Khwai. We explored as much of the area as we could in 6 days, sometimes on tracks that barely seemed to exist. At times we would find the tracks of the leopard with the cub, but we just couldn't track them down. And only once at night did I hear the distant soaring of a leopard. But we had a lot more luck with the lions. At times we found them in some epic light, and it felt an absolute privilege to be able to spend so much time with the pride, and we were often completely on our own with them. Some evenings we would find the lions so close to our camp that we could sit and watch them as the sun set behind. Of course, Khwai isn't just about elephants and lion. There was so much else to see, including these young giraffes sparring. But we saw so much else. My youngest son saw his first red lechwe, and our bird list was comfortably over 80 species for the 6 days. Although not our first time in Khwai, this 6-day trip completely exceeded our expectations. Our goals for an overlanding trip as a family is for us all to encounter unforgettable experiences, and so far this trip was absolutely delivering. But all good things come to an end, and after an unforgettable 6 nights, we have to leave Khwai. We packed up early and headed back on the dusty, sandy and corrugated Chobe Road. On the way we managed to stop at a village tuck shop and bought the locally baked magwinya. And at £1 each, I bought enough to keep us going for another long day on the road. We headed past Maun and on to Planet Baobab in Makgadikgadi, where we would camp underneath the famous baobabs. After being in the wilds of Khwai, it felt odd to eat in a restaurant, but after a thoroughly relaxing evening, we woke up early to head out on what would prove to be a bucket list experience. We are very fortunate to have been on many safaris over the years, and while some of those have been in areas known for their meerkats, meerkats have always eluded us. So this morning, we were on a guided trip to meet the meerkats at the Makgadikgadi. We were so lucky to be able to spend hours with these meerkats. These meerkats are habituated to humans, so we could follow them and observe them. We had to drag ourselves away for breakfast, and even after the amazing sightings in Khwai, this was an absolute highlight of the trip so far. So I promised the boys if we found meerkats we'd cross the Makgadikgadi on quad bikes. The Makgadikgadi Pan is a salt pan situated in the middle of the dry savannah in northeastern Botswana and is surrounded by the Kalahari Desert. It's one of the largest salt flats in the world, and it's all that remains of the enormous Lake Makgadikgadi, which once covered an area larger than Switzerland. After the excitement of the meerkats and the quad biking, we were scheduled to have a rest day. But after a morning's yoga underneath the baobabs, we decided to pack up and head north to Chobe, a day earlier than planned. My wife and I have been to Chobe a number of times before. The specific reason for bringing the boys to Chobe on this trip was to get up close to elephants crossing the Chobe River. But as was the case for the rest of this trip, the game viewing in the park way exceeded our expectations. Each morning we took our time heading from the gate towards the river, enjoying the sightings in the early morning light. Families of kudu were frequent, whilst crocodile were a constant sight patrolling the river edge. Morning coffee would be taken overlooking the river. These elephants on the other side of the river were actually in Namibia. Here, the centre line of the river is the border between these two countries. Every day we were lucky enough to see rowan antelope, but on this occasion, whilst watching the family of rowan coming down to drink, we were also watching a pride of lions setting an elaborate trap. With the bulk of the pride spread out across the floodplain, one lioness sprung the trap by charging from under a bush on the riverbank. They focused their attention on the adult male. The well-executed plan seemed destined for success, but the outright pace of the rowan meant these lions retreated back into the shade without anything to show for their efforts. With adrenaline high in our Land Rover, we were all celebrating the fact that the rowan survived, conscious though that this pride of lions were clearly hungry. Unbelievably, the very next day in almost the same area of floodplain, we found 4 wild dogs also on the hunt. These guys though were focused on a small group of impala in the very distant. But across this open expanse you could really see a different strategy being deployed. Dogs known to have the highest success rate of all the African predators, thought to be in excess of 90%, aimed to outrun their prey. This hunt was on and we all thought it was going to end in success for the dogs. We could only assume that these dogs called off this chase as the impala ran towards where the lions from yesterday were seen earlier in the day. Wild dogs are one of our favourites, and they're the reason why Joe and I first came to Botswana in 2009. Since then, we've seen them in 4 different countries, and for Rafe, no safari is complete without a wild dog sighting. What is particularly unusual about this trip is that for the last 3 safaris, we've had to wait until the last day of the trip to find dogs. But on this occasion, we still had 3 days left. When we booked our trip, we couldn't get enough time in Nahaha, which is a camp inside of the park. So we stayed outside at Senyati. Whilst the drive to and from the park wasn't great, we really did enjoy the waterhole in front of the bar. It was a novelty to eat pizza and drink G&T whilst watching families of elephant also come in for a drink. There is also a water level hide which allows you to get really close to the action at the waterhole. By staying outside of the park, it did make it easier to undertake trips on the river. We undertook a number of different trips from different operators. We even tried our hand at tiger fishing, unfortunately without success. But these river trips are really an opportunity to change pace and to relax, albeit with the hope of seeing elephants crossing the river. On one of our evening trips, we were drifting along in total relaxation, only to be jolted awake by witnessing a battle of power as these young male hippos decided that one had outstayed his welcome. This area of the Chobe riverfront is also a birder's paradise. This black heron was using his wings as a shade to form a canopy whilst fishing. Amongst the other bird sightings, yellow-billed storks also kept us entertained as we slowly made our way downstream, hoping to find the elephant herds. Unfortunately, we didn't get the elephant experiences that we have had previously on the Chobe River, but each had its special moment and each had a magical sunset. Chobe is famous for its large buffalo herds, which converge along the riverfront and floodplain in the dry months. But this herd, which looked totally exhausted, appeared one day and was gone the next. We were expecting them to stay and we were expecting a lot of interest from the local lions, but they were clearly on a mission to find somewhere else to graze. Just like Khwai, there was so much happening. We took our time every day to enjoy everything Chobe had to offer. This banded mongoose showed a hunting strategy much like the meerkat from earlier in the trip. But time was running out for us. We headed into Chobe at sunrise for our final day in the park. To say that we had seen epic sightings on this trip would have been an understatement, but Botswana wasn't finished with us yet. Even though sightings had been amazing, leopards had eluded us, but on our final morning, a slightly quivering white tail tip gave away this leopard. We'd had Rafe's absolute favourite animal, and now it was time for Edison's, so we spent the next 5 minutes watching the leopard as it disappeared into the bush. Totally happy and satisfied, we decided to take a slow drive for coffee with the idea of leaving the park early. Only for the plan to change as we bumped into the 4 wild dogs from earlier in the week. Of course, we had to follow them, and in the chaos of trying to follow them on another hunt, we bumped into the sighting of the holiday, and for me, only the second sighting of a brown hyena I have had in thousands of hours on safari, and the first I've had in daylight and with a camera. An overlanding trip like this is always memorable, and this one was memorable for all the right reasons. We found fun, adventure and challenge. It was the perfect tactical time out from the routines of daily life in the UK. Botswana is the perfect location for an unforgettable overlanding experience. We drove the long and dusty roads, camped under the stars, we even got a Land Rover stuck in the River Khwai. We met some incredible like-minded people and we witnessed some amazing wildlife. The journey back to Hoedspruit leads to more driving, but on our way south from Kasane we find a real bonus at the side of the potholed road, in Hill's Coffee Stop. I'd read great things before this trip, so I was pleased to see the roadside barista open to help fuel our journey south. Once back in Hoedspruit, it is easy to think that our African adventure is over. But on our final night, we are treated to a nocturnal showing of these bush babies. There was a family of 6 that lived adjacent to the cottage that we were staying in. Our last surprise of the trip before heading home was at the Hoedspruit Reptile Centre. We dropped in to see our friends Chris and Jess, who run this amazing centre, to catch up on the great work they've been doing since we saw them last. And we were so lucky to get a behind-the-scenes peek at some of their latest conservation work. This included being able to get up close to these amazing sun gazer lizards, learning about the threats to their habitats and from the illegal pet trade. But for now we bid farewell to this unforgettable journey in southern Africa. The stories gathered and the memories of the untamed spirit of Botswana will live long after this journey has ended.